She only opened the drawer because she was looking for a passport. Instead, she found 43 love letters. Every one addressed to her. Every one unsigned. Every one stained by time. And every one hidden beneath a loaded pistol. The strangest part wasn't that the most feared mafia boss in the city had secretly written them. It was that none of the letters had ever been sent, because 3 hours earlier, he had ordered everyone to prepare for war. And according to the men guarding the mansion, someone inside the family had already signed his death warrant. So the question wasn't whether Isabella's arranged marriage had been built on lies. It was whether she would discover the truth before she became a widow. There are two kinds of marriages in the mafia world: the ones built on love and the ones built on survival. Isabella Rossi never had the luxury of choosing between them. At 24, she was traded like a peace treaty. Her father's debts had become impossible to repay, and the only currency powerful enough to erase them was his daughter. The man waiting at the altar wasn't simply rich. He wasn't just dangerous. He was Luca Moretti, a name powerful enough to silence crowded rooms. A man politicians feared. A man rival families prayed they would never cross. No one knew exactly how many enemies he had. No one knew how many people had disappeared after betraying him. But everyone agreed on one thing: Luca Moretti never married for love. And Isabella knew it. The wedding lasted 28 minutes. The marriage contract was longer than the vows. Not once during the ceremony did Luca smile. Not once did he whisper promises. When photographers asked them to stand closer, he did, but only because appearances mattered. Afterward, he escorted her into the black limousine waiting outside. No congratulations. No kiss. No celebration. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than screaming. From that day forward, Isabella lived inside a mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. Armed guards watched every entrance. Bulletproof windows reflected gardens no one ever enjoyed. Every hallway echoed with footsteps that never sounded relaxed. She had everything money could buy, except freedom, except affection, except answers. Luca was strangely predictable. He left before sunrise, returned after dark, ate dinner in silence, spent most nights inside his private office where even his closest men needed permission to enter. Sometimes she noticed fresh cuts across his knuckles. Sometimes dried blood stained the cuff of his white shirt. She never asked questions, because in the mafia, questions often became funerals. Weeks turned into months. Then something unusual happened. Small acts, tiny details, things that made no sense. Whenever she forgot a book she'd been reading, it somehow appeared beside her favorite chair. When she mentioned liking lilies only once, fresh flowers appeared every Monday. The security cameras near her garden walks were quietly upgraded after she complained about feeling watched. Her favorite tea, imported from a country she'd only mentioned once, never ran out. She assumed the staff was simply efficient. She never imagined every request came from Luca himself, because he never claimed the kindness, never expected gratitude, never even looked for recognition. He remained distant, cold, untouchable, as though building walls around his own heart was safer than opening a single door. But if he cared, why marry her like a business contract? Why sleep in another wing of the mansion? Why never tell her? The mystery only grew darker 6 months later. One rainy evening, Isabella woke to gunshots exploding somewhere beyond the estate walls. Men shouted orders through the courtyard. Vehicles raced through the gates. She rushed toward the hallway, only to find Luca standing outside her bedroom door. His suit was soaked with rain. Blood dripped from his hand. Not all of it was his. Without saying a word, he handed her a small velvet box. Inside rested an antique silver key. Then he gave a single instruction: "If anyone except me asks for this, run." Before she could ask what it opened, he disappeared back into the storm. She wouldn't understand the importance of that key until the day she discovered the drawer and the letters that would completely destroy everything she believed about her husband, because hidden inside those pages was a confession Luca Moretti had spent years trying to bury. And once Isabella read the first line, there would be no turning back. The first letter wasn't folded like the others. It looked as though someone had read it 100 times, then hidden it away forever. Isabella's fingers trembled as she unfolded the yellowed paper. The handwriting was sharp, controlled. The handwriting of a man who rarely allowed emotion to escape. Yet the very first sentence shattered everything she believed. "You will probably spend your whole life believing I never wanted this marriage." She stopped breathing. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. She already knew. Only one man in the mansion wrote with a fountain pen. Only one man locked his office every night. Only one man never explained himself. Luca, she read on. That is the safest lie I can give you. Her heart pounded. For almost a year, she had convinced herself she was nothing more than a business agreement. A payment. A symbol of peace between powerful families. Yet these pages whispered another story. One she had never imagined. The second letter was dated 6 months before their wedding. Today I watched you leave the hospital after visiting your mother. Isabella frowned. Her mother had died nearly 2 years ago. No. One had known she spent those final months in that hospital except immediate family. How could Luca know? She kept reading. You smiled at a little girl in the hallway, even though you had just received the worst news of your life. I remember wondering how someone carrying so much pain could still make another person feel safe. She lowered the page. The memory came rushing back. The little girl with the stuffed rabbit. The broken vending machine. The smile she'd forced because she didn't want the child to be frightened. She had never noticed anyone watching. But someone had been. Luca, her mysterious husband, had seen her long before their fathers ever discussed marriage. Another envelope. Another impossible confession. I refused your father's proposal 3 times. Her eyes widened. Everyone had told her Luca demanded the marriage, that he had seen an opportunity to expand his empire, that her family had no choice. But according to the letters, the opposite had happened. Why would everyone lie? The answer came only a few lines later. If I accepted too quickly, they would investigate why. Investigate what? She searched the page desperately. Instead, she found another sentence. Some secrets keep people alive. The letter ended there. No explanation. Only another question. She reached for the next envelope. Each page pulled another brick from the wall she had built around her heart. Luca had noticed things she herself had forgotten. The novels she reread every winter. The necklace she stopped wearing after her mother's funeral. The way she tucked loose strands of hair behind her left ear. Whenever she became nervous, he had written about all of it. Never once expecting her to read his words. Never once believing they would leave that drawer. Then she found the shortest letter of all. Only 4 lines. If you ever hate me, please hate the man you see. Never the man I wished I could become. Because those are 2 different people. Tears blurred the ink. For the first time since the wedding, she wondered if she had misunderstood everything. A loud crash echoed downstairs. She quickly folded the letter. Heavy footsteps thundered through the mansion. Not the calm rhythm of servants. Not Luca's measured stride. This was different. Fast. Urgent. Armed men. A knock exploded against her bedroom door. My lady. It was Matteo, Luca's oldest bodyguard. His voice carried something she'd never heard before. Fear. She opened the door. Matteo's usually composed face was streaked with blood. There isn't much time. What happened? He wants you underground. Where's Luca? The bodyguard hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. Something had gone terribly wrong. Another explosion shook the mansion. The windows rattled. Somewhere outside, automatic gunfire erupted. The war had arrived. Matteo grabbed her wrist. Bring the silver key. Her heart nearly stopped. The key. The one Luca had entrusted to her months ago. She hurried to retrieve it. As she slipped it into her pocket, another envelope slid from the drawer onto the floor. Unlike the others, its seal was still unbroken. Across the front were only 5 handwritten words. Only open if I die. Isabella stared at it. Her hands refused to move. Outside, men shouted. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Matteo appeared in the doorway. We have to go. She tucked the unopened letter inside her coat. Something told her, before this night ended, she would have no choice but to read it. And somewhere beyond the burning gardens, Luca Moretti was fighting a battle he had expected all along. Because hidden among the letters was one truth Isabella still hadn't discovered. The war wasn't about territory. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about her. And every bullet fired at the Moretti family tonight had her name behind it. The underground bunker was colder than Isabella expected. Not because of the stone walls. Because of what they contained. Matteo hurried her through a steel door that disappeared behind them with a deafening clang. The room wasn't filled with gold bars, stacks of cash, or the treasures people imagined a mafia empire would hide. Instead, shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with thick binders, hard drives, photographs, and locked metal boxes. Every secret Luca Moretti had spent years collecting was buried beneath the mansion. Every alliance, every betrayal, every enemy, and somehow, every answer. Another explosion shook dust from the ceiling. Matteo moved to a reinforced cabinet. The key. Isabella pulled the antique silver key from her pocket. As soon as Matteo unlocked the cabinet, he stepped back. I can't open the rest. She frowned. What do you mean? He said only you. Before she could ask another question, Matteo disappeared toward the communication room, leaving her alone. Inside the cabinet sat a single black wooden chest. No decorations, no family crest, only a brass lock. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key. The lock clicked. Inside were three things: a leather journal, a sealed envelope, and a faded photograph. She picked up the picture first. It showed a young Luca, perhaps 19 years old. His face was leaner, his expression less guarded. Standing beside him was an older man she recognized immediately. Her father. They weren't enemies. They were smiling. She turned the photograph over. Written on the back were 6 words. The promise we both had to keep. Nothing made sense anymore. She opened the journal. The first page contained only a date. 8 years earlier. Long before anyone had mentioned marriage. Tonight, Alessandro Rossi saved my life. Her father. Luca continued. He took the bullet meant for me. He asked for only one promise before losing consciousness. Isabella leaned closer. Protect my daughter from this life. Her pulse quickened. The words blurred as tears gathered in her eyes. She kept reading. He believed someone inside the commission was building an organization that would one day destroy every family unwilling to obey them. The commission, the council that supposedly kept peace between the most powerful mafia families. If someone inside it had turned corrupt, no one would be safe. Another page. He gave me evidence before the surgery. If they ever discover he trusted me, they will kill his entire bloodline. Isabella's breathing became shallow. That was why her father had never explained the marriage. That was why Luca had remained distant. He hadn't been hiding from her. He had been hiding the truth. Every cold glance, every silent dinner, every sleepless night. They had never been rejection. They had been protection. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Now you know. She spun around. Luca stood in the doorway. Blood soaked through the sleeve of his black shirt. One side of his face was bruised. His breathing was heavy. But he was alive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his eyes fell to the open journal. I hoped you would never see that. She searched his face. Every unanswered question from the past year suddenly demanded to be heard. You knew my father before me. A small nod. You watched me years before our wedding. Another nod. You wrote those letters. Silence. His silence was all the confirmation she needed. I never wanted your pity, he finally said. His voice was calm, almost tired. I wanted you to have a chance at a normal life. You married me because it was the only way to keep you alive. The words landed harder than any explosion outside. Luca slowly crossed the room. There were men already planning your father's death. She stared. He knew it. He accepted it. He believed. Marrying you into my family would place the strongest army in the country between you and them. So everything was arranged before he died. She looked away. For months, she had hated Luca for treating her like part of a contract. Now she realized he had been carrying a promise made to a dying friend, one he never expected to be thanked for. Her eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you tell me? His answer came almost instantly. Because everyone I love becomes a target. The room fell silent. For the first time, she saw not the feared Mafia king, not the man whispered about in terrified voices, but someone unbearably lonely, someone who believed love itself was dangerous. She reached into her coat and removed the letters. I read them. Luca's expression changed. Not panic, not anger, regret. You weren't supposed to. I know. Another pause. Then she held up the sealed envelope. The one marked only open if I die. His face lost all color. Don't. You expected tonight. I planned for every outcome. Except surviving? He didn't answer. She realized then. Luca had entered the battle believing he might never come back. The letter had been his goodbye. Suddenly, the emergency lights turned red. Matteo's voice echoed through the bunker speakers. Boss. Static. They're inside. Luca instantly drew his pistol. How many? They knew about the tunnels. His expression darkened. Only 4 people had known those tunnels existed. Luca, Matteo, the family lawyer. And his younger cousin, Enzo. Luca closed his eyes for one brief second. No. He whispered it like a man already mourning someone who was still alive. Isabella understood immediately. The traitor wasn't an outsider. It was family. Before either of them could react, the bunker lights went black. A single gunshot echoed through the darkness. Then another. Metal doors slammed open somewhere in the tunnel, and from the shadows came a familiar voice. One Isabella had trusted since the day she entered the mansion. Looking for the truth, a flashlight clicked on. Its beam revealed Enzo, smiling, holding Matteo at gunpoint. And here I thought Uncle Luca would keep his little wife ignorant forever. The betrayal wasn't coming. It had been living inside the house all along. Enzo smiled as though he had already won. The beam of his flashlight settled on Isabella before drifting toward Luca. So, he said quietly, she finally knows. Luca never lowered his weapon. His breathing remained steady despite the blood soaking through his sleeve. You should have left when you had the chance. Enzo laughed. Leave? After spending years building this. Isabella felt her stomach tighten. Years. This hadn't been a sudden betrayal. It had been planned. Every attack, every leak, every ambush that somehow caught Luca's organization by surprise. Someone inside had been guiding the enemy all along. I earned your trust, Enzo continued. You handed me responsibility. You treated me like family. You were family, Luca replied. Were. The single word echoed through the bunker. For the first time, Enzo's smile faltered. Then it returned, harder than before. Family is weakness. No, Luca answered. It's the only reason you're still alive. The silence that followed felt heavier than the concrete walls surrounding them. Enzo suddenly shoved Matteo aside and fired. The gunshot exploded through the corridor. Luca pushed Isabella behind a steel support as the bullet tore into the wall where she had been standing moments earlier. Another shot. Another. Concrete splintered around them. Luca returned fire only once. Not to kill, to force Enzo back into cover. Even now, he was trying to avoid taking the life of the man he had once called his own. That hesitation nearly cost him everything. A bullet struck Luca high in the shoulder. He staggered. Isabella caught him before he fell. Warm blood soaked through her hands. Luca, I'm all right. It was an obvious lie. He was growing pale. Outside the bunker, more footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Their enemies were closing in. Enzo smiled again. You've always had one weakness. His eyes shifted toward Isabella. You couldn't stop protecting her. Only then did Isabella understand. She had never been leverage. She had been the objective. The hidden records her father had, entrusted to Luca, could expose the powerful network manipulating criminal organizations from the shadows. As long as she lived, there remained someone who could connect the final pieces. Enzo wanted those records destroyed. He wanted every witness gone, including her. Luca leaned close enough that only Isabella could hear. When I tell you to run, she shook her head. I'm not leaving you. You have to. No. Their eyes met. For the first time since their wedding. Neither of them hid behind silence. I spent a year believing you never cared, she whispered. I cared too much. Another burst of gunfire interrupted them. Enzo's men reached the entrance. Luca exhaled slowly. Then he did something Isabella never expected. He placed his pistol in her hands. If anything happens. She looked at him in disbelief. I trust you. Those 3 words struck deeper than any declaration of love. Because Luca Moretti had trusted almost no one. Not after years of betrayal. Not after watching friends become enemies. Yet now, his life rested in her hands. The firefight erupted almost immediately. Matteo and the remaining guards held the narrow corridor while Luca guided Isabella toward a reinforced exit. Enzo appeared again through the smoke. He aimed directly at Isabella. Everything slowed. Luca saw it. So did she. There wasn't enough time to move them both. Without hesitation, he stepped between them. The shot rang out. Luca collapsed. For one terrible second, the world became silent. Then Isabella screamed. Enzo lowered his weapon, certain the fight was over. He never noticed Matteo circling through a maintenance passage. A single shot echoed behind him. Enzo froze. The pistol slipped from his hand. He looked back in disbelief before collapsing onto the cold concrete. The bunker fell quiet. Only Isabella's sobs remained. She knelt beside Luca, pressing trembling hands against the wound. No. His breathing was shallow. I told you, he managed with the faintest smile. Everyone I love becomes a target. Tears streamed down her face. And you still love me anyway. His answer was almost too soft to hear. There was never another choice. Emergency crews loyal to Luca's organization arrived minutes later. The surgeons worked for hours. No one knew whether he would survive. For 3 days, Isabella never left the hospital. She barely slept, barely ate. She simply waited. On the 4th morning, a nurse handed her a small envelope. It was found in his jacket. Her heart stopped. It was the letter, the one marked, "Only open if I die." With trembling fingers, she opened it. The first line blurred through her tears. "If you're reading this, then I failed to keep my promise." She continued, "You deserved a husband who could take you to ordinary places. Someone who could hold your hand in public without looking over his shoulder. Instead, I gave you locked gates, armed guards, and long nights alone. If there is one thing I ask, it is this. Don't let my mistakes convince you that you were never loved." The final sentence broke her completely. Every letter I never sent was a conversation I was too afraid to have, because loving you openly would have painted a target on your heart. At that exact moment, a weak voice came from behind her. So, she turned so quickly the letter slipped from her hands. Luca was awake. His face was pale, his shoulder heavily bandaged. But he was smiling. A real smile. The first she had ever seen. She crossed the room in an instant, wrapping her arms around him as tears of relief finally gave way to laughter. Sometimes love isn't hidden because it isn't real. Sometimes it's hidden because fear convinces us that silence is the safest way to protect the people we cherish. But silence has a cost. It leaves room for doubt, for loneliness, for years that can never be reclaimed. Luca finally understood that. And Isabella finally understood the man behind the walls he had built around his heart. The 43 letters were never meant to stay in a drawer forever. They were simply waiting for the day when neither of them had to be afraid anymore. The end.